On episode 689 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Sarah Cripps and discuss her book, Cancer Isn't All About Chemo, Keeping Your Body Strong Whilst Trying to Treat and Prevent Disease. Welcome to the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, the largest and longest running health and fitness podcast dedicated to people over 40. Whether you're looking to lose weight, get stronger, or improve your health and age better, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Coach Allen, an online health and fitness coach and author of the Wellness Roadmap. Each week, we dive into practical tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and fitness. If you're ready to look, feel, and perform your best, no matter your age, this podcast is the perfect place to start. Let's get you on the path to a healthier, fitter, and more energetic version of yourself. I hope you'll join us each week, and together we can unlock your full potential. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Allen. I'm really glad you're here. This week, I'm actually still in North Carolina working on some family stuff, and it looks like I'm probably going to have a few more weeks to go before I can head back home. With that extra time, not having the Lula's deal, and I can't really help her too much with that, but I'm here doing what I can. But I've had some time to work on a new project, and I'm really excited about it. And I'm happy to announce that I'll be basically announce that I'm going to announce. That's kind of funny, isn't it? But I'm going to be announcing it next week. So if you're interested in maintaining your health and fitness as you age, you're going to love it. Now, speaking of aging, as I mentioned last week, I'm going to be on the Longevity Blueprint for Men Virtual Summit. My friend John Tubbs is having 21 health and fitness experts share strategies, tactics, tips, and tricks for men to live long, healthy lives. This summit will start on April 14th, so you still got some time to get in there, but don't dilly-dally. You should check it out at 40plusfitness.com/Tubbs. That's Tubbs. Again, this is the Longevity Blueprint for Men Virtual Summit with John Tubbs. He's going to have 21 health and fitness experts sharing their strategies, tactics, tips, and tricks. You should go check it out at 40plusfitness.com/Tubbs. When our guest's little boy was diagnosed with leukemia, her reaction was to find out as much as she could, as fast as she could, to help her child get well. This book is the result of that work. It is the book she wishes she had found when Teddy was facing chemotherapy. Underpinned by scientific studies, Cancer Isn't All About Chemo gives you the knowledge to help your and your loved one's body stay strong through traditional treatments, such as bone marrow transplant, stem cell transplant, and chemotherapy, and to support a better outcome. The methods in this book are safe. She informed her son's medical team, a leading UK cancer hospital, of every single one. Many books about cancer deal only with adult cancer. This book can also help you fight childhood cancer. While a promise of a cure is impossible to make, she has compiled her research for you and is sharing exactly what she did for Teddy with such fantastic results. With no further ado, here's Sarah Cripps. Sarah, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Hi, Ellen. Thank you for having me.
Your book, Cancer Isn't All About Chemo, Keeping Your Body Strong Whilst Trying to Treat and Prevent Disease. I just want to commend you. I mean, really, I didn't know when I asked to interview you that this was going to be about child cancer, leukemia. And I got into, I'm like, okay, I'm going to tear up a few times reading this book if she says anything, about her child and about this whole thing. And you put it all out there. That took a lot of courage. So I want to commend you for being willing to share your journey, because I do think it's going to help. It's going to provide a lot of hope too, which is one of the hardest things to have when we start talking about cancer.
I appreciate that. I think I wrote that book as a mother the day that her child was diagnosed. And like any loving parent, was thinking, how can I contribute to his survival? Because there was no guarantee. And I spent hours and hours looking. And this is all of the years, almost 3 years worth of my work, of the research, this book that I wanted somebody to hand to me to say, I'm not going to guarantee this is going to save your son's life, but here's a direction of travel. Read this book rather than having to go everywhere else and look at it's science backed. It's not woo boo or weird. So yeah, I wrote it for that mum, and it's not just for children, it's also for adults, and it's also for those who are going through chronic illness, which as we get older, 40 plus fitness, it's really important that we start looking after ourselves. So it is a book for everyone, but obviously it is my son's journey backed by science.
Yeah. And if you're not the one that gets the cancer, someone in your life will. So the information that's in here is valuable because it gives you some opportunities to not feel like things are just happening to you. And I think there's a lot of empowerment when you can sit there and say, there are things I can be doing to improve my condition, to improve the outcome. And I really think that's powerful because just sitting back and doing what the doctor says, that just doesn't feel good to just not have the opportunity to know that you're doing your best to put your best foot forward.
I think from my perspective, and obviously I reached out to the oncology community before the book came out to make sure I dealt with it tactfully, is there are no guarantees, but do any of us want to sit back and go, I wish? And, I could have done that if it was myself, but like my little boy was 17 months old when he went into hospital. He was a twin. I was so desperate to have him. I couldn't rely, and that's not to discredit or to bash those in the medical profession. They helped save my son's life, but they were strangers to me. There were different people coming in all the time making decisions. And I, as his mum, had to stand up and advocate for him and say, hold on a minute, this doesn't make sense. And especially like in oncology, there's a phrase that really drives me crazy, which is like, it doesn't matter what you eat, calories are king. And I'm like, we just go back a step.
Yeah.
If we're outside of this ward, it's outside of this unit, you'll be telling me as a parent, 5 fruit and veg a day, lots of water, no sodas, movement. But when we're in here, it's different. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. I want to get into that because, I wouldn't even pretend to understand why they would think that food, and how you treat your body and how healthy you get yourself otherwise, that wouldn't impact your immune system. I mean, just something as simple as vitamin D. We know vitamin D is important for your immune system. We know that when they started talking about the people who were suffering the worst under COVID, most of them were deficient in vitamin D. So it does have an impact. Our nutrition does have an impact on how strong our body is and how capable it is. So I want to talk about that. Why is it important?
Why is nutrition important? So
yes.
I think we've lost ourselves a little bit with nutrition. I think we do need to go back a little bit to 2 or 3 generations ago and not overcomplicate it. All of the biological processes that are going on in mine and yours body right now are dependent upon nutrition, from the gut-brain axis to how it affects our mental health, to our digestive system, to the repair of healthy cells. They each have a unique need, which is why you hear about, eat the rainbow, eat diversity, eat plants. I'm not saying don't eat meat. We do eat meat as a family, but we eat high quality meat. We try and go for grass-fed meat and the likes. But it's about that the body needs it. It is his fuel. And, to quote the first father of medicine, it's like, let food be thy medicine, and all disease first starts in the gut. But I think because of the diet industry and big food and things like that, we've kind of like lost some of the very basics, which is like, for me to get up every morning, my body has to be fueled. If I spend 2 weeks in the bed and I don't drink and I don't eat, I will die. So I do think it's a little bit like when you start breaking it down and talking to people, it's like, well, what do you think is going to happen if you eat like potato chips like for a week and chocolate bars and candy and things like that? How do you think your body's going to function? It just can't. It's not designed to.
Yeah. We're not going to jump on the medical people because they're doing what they know to do. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, but they're not given a huge education on nutrition. And, what I find that's kind of bizarre about all this is that, but they do know that the chemo leaches nutrients from your body. And so if you're not replacing what's being taken away by the chemotherapy, then you're malnourished. There's no other answer to that. And so getting the proper nutrition and in many cases, the proper supplements. But I liked one thing you said that I thought was really important is that you still need to be transparent with your medical professionals so they know what is what and they're not making decisions in a vacuum because that could be a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to touch on your point about like doctors, I think we have to understand that with the number of people that are in this world now and medical specialists, an oncologist is there to understand about chemotherapy and the behavior of malignant cells. They have not been trained in nutrition. They have something like 20 hours in the whole of their undergraduate study. They will send you to a dietitian, but the dietitians in our medical systems are taught about like milk feeds. Like that's not just, by the way, in pediatric cancers, that's also in adult cancers. It's about the bare minimum and it's about being able to prescribe certain things. But yeah, I think so. The conversation that myself and my medical team had, so I hired a naturopathic doctor who was actually a previously what you would call in the States like a board certified doctor. Her daughter had had leukemia 20 years before. So she'd walked my path and she'd decided to go more into the integrative space. I was transparent with my team that we were having the meeting. I shared with them what she had suggested. She worked very diligently to know all of the drugs my son was on and his blood results and his test results from his bone marrow checks. And I think the challenge that came for me was when I sat in that, the dietitian came into the room to have a conversation about it. She came with a stack of papers that had been printed from memory Sloan Kettering and just proceeded to say, don't recommend this, don't recommend that, don't recommend this. And I always say this, like, if they just come in with a little bit of something, like, we don't want you to do this, but you can do that one, I think I probably wouldn't have gone as nuclear with some of the supplements, because how I felt in that moment is like, you don't want to work with me. You want to work against me. You want to tell me where my place sits in this process. And as his mother, I feel fiercely protective that I trust myself. So yeah, I was very clear with them. Thank you. This is what we're going to do. I've heard what you say are the risks. So for example, some of the supplements, you may have risks that there are platelet deficiencies and the like. Well, that's what also chemotherapy does. So what's the fix? More platelets or more blood transfusions. In those instances, it's about looking at like balancing the risk of like what could possibly happen and how do we prevent this thing happening. So in the oncology world, there's obviously frequent and regular blood tests. So it's just about telling your team, I'm doing this thing. I've heard your feedback. I'm choosing that this is the right path for me, but let's make sure that this test is on my blood work so that we can make sure that I don't find myself in like a difficult situation. So it should be teamwork and there should be mutual respect.
Now, you referenced a study on a supplement I'd never heard of before called IP6, and then I guess related or same thing, but there's different types, is inositol. I had never heard of these, and then I looked at the actual study and I was like, it's right there.
It is literally,
It's like
isn't
right
it?
there, the positive effects. And based on what you said in the book, I mean, this is not just like one study then where they say we now need more studies. Like, there's been significant work around this particular supplement set. Can you talk a little bit about what IP6 and inositol are?
Yeah, so it's IP6 plus inositol. It's
Oh,
I
inositol.
can't
Okay.
pronounce. Yeah,
When I
that
read
is
things,
this.
I can't hear
Yeah,
them in my head.
no, that's fine. So Dr. Kate James, she introduced me to that was our integrative doctor. She introduced me to IP6 and inositol. And what I loved about her, she didn't gatekeep any of her academic contacts. So actually, in the States, you got Professor Shamsuddin, who was the professor at the University of Maryland's medical faculty. He started the research into IP6 40 years ago. I mean, this guy is incredible. I still have him like on WhatsApp. He still checks in on Teddy like all the time, wants to know how he's doing. And so I started, and it's fiber. It's fiber. It's actually in our food. It's just at a much more concentrated dose. And that was actually one of the supplements that my team really didn't want us to try because of the risk to platelet reduction. And with IP6, so this is so many PubMed, NIH studies. So like you said, like it's backed, it's there. And I won't talk about why it hasn't made its way into mainstream because I can only hypothesize why that could possibly be, why it can't be patented. Well, it can't be. It's plant-based, right? But what I can say to you, and this story still like is so etched in my memory. My child was about a month after his diagnosis. I had ordered the IP6 from the States rather than a UK supplier completely by accident. I was waiting for it to arrive. I was in the hospital with my son because he'd ended up with a line infection. You have like the lines and stuff, and it's really scary when they get a line infection because you can get the sepsis and the like. He had this ulcer hanging up the bottom of his lip. He wasn't eating, and he had been eating really well up until then, and still healthy. We weren't talking about beige foods, like proper nutritious meals. And they had bullied me into giving him an NG tube down his nose. I promise you, like, I gave that child a couple of doses and went home. And Alan, this ulcer from hanging from his lip, I turned around, he was playing with his twin, kind of how he could at that time, and it gone. And I was like, I thought it burst because it was huge. And then I kind of got my husband to help out and we had a look. It'd gone back in on itself. So I went back to the hospital because at that time they'd given us like a few hours reprieve in between antibiotic doses to go home. I went home and went back earlier than I needed to because I was desperate to find the nurse that had been caring for us before handover because I needed her to write it down that actually, like, you know, it wasn't a crazy mother. Like that thing had gone back on itself without any medication to do so. And that night, and this is the part that does almost make me feel quite emotional, but so I'll try not to cry, but like, that night, my child sat up in bed, having been asleep for a few hours and demanded food. And it actually gives me chills talking about it. And he never, ever stopped eating from that day until he didn't stop eating. He didn't stop eating. He didn't lose his hair like his peers did. Like, you know, it thinned, but he still had hair. Whenever we would go and see, like, go back in for treatment and the nurses, people would struggle to actually understand where he was in his treatment plan because he didn't have the NG. He was eating. He was running around the ward, like terrorizing the nurses. He looked like a well child with just a bit of thin hair. And that's the one supplement that I would say to anybody who is going through an oncology journey or has had chronic illness, or even just my husband and I take it, you know, it is a fiber. It's all natural. But the studies that suggest, you know, because we have to use the word suggest, about how it boosts the immune system, how it can reduce the progression of cancer cells, how it helps with chemo side effects is just incredible. And I just wish everybody knew about it.
Yeah. It's definitely something that if you find yourself in that situation, do your own due diligence. But I was just blown away with what I saw at PubMed. And again, the references before and after, this is not just some flash in the pan study that was done to sell more of this stuff. This is the legit thing. So it's worth looking into. Another strategy you took, and I've heard this before because I've had various people on talking about how cancers fed, most cancers, not all cancers, but a lot of cancers are fed by a glucose. They burn a lot of glucose. And so there's kind of a concept of, well, you can slow tumor growth, slow the cancer if your blood sugar's more regular, if it's lower. And you use some intermittent fasting as a technique to kind of help Teddy. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so intermittent fasting was a bit challenging because of his age, but it was helped by the fact that we wouldn't allow them to give him any milk feeds. So intermittent fasting, so obviously when your body is at rest and it's not having to digest food, it is able to do some of that repair and regenerate process. And I've been on some really reputable forums and where they were talking about the importance of fasting on chemo days and fasting the day after. So with Teddy, obviously being a young child, a 7-day water fast, forget it. I mean, social services would have taken the child away. And I don't think he would have allowed me to do that. But what I tried to do as much as possible was get him 16 hours and past. So we would deliberately in the morning when he would get up, just play with him a little bit more and just try and not make it so food centric of the morning. So push that breakfast meal out as close as we could to the mid morning. And then in the evenings, what we would be doing is he would have his evening meal at say 4:00, maybe some oat milk because we weren't doing dairy because of the quality of the dairy that we had access to in the hospital. And then it'd be down to go to bed. And it was really clear, no snacks. And there were definitely some times where he had tantrums, but there was a lot of really, really good stuff out there about the benefits of not just for cancers, about when we give our body the time to kind of not have to do its digestion process, how it can support and heal us in the regeneration of the good cells.
Now, you brought up something in the book that I think is really, really important, because most of this, we're going to have to stand our ground. You were the mother hen all along. This is what you're going to feed my boy. He's not eating that stuff that you serve everybody else. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Here's why we're going to do it. Full transparency, but you held your ground almost all the way through this. You held your ground and fought for your boy. I think a lot of it just comes down to language, and it's a language of, for lack of a better word, fear, because they don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And so they'll say words like, do not recommend. And if you're not familiar with what that means, you might think that they're saying this is unsafe and you should not do it, which is not what they're actually saying. Can you kind of define those words as the medical profession uses them? Because I think that's really important, because if we're not speaking the same language, it's really hard to reach consensus.
And I think they don't tell you that you're not speaking the same language. And that's just something as part of the process. And maybe having somebody who was as passionate as myself, I was desperate to get to the bottom of it. I've had people contact me on Instagram and social media and say, I read your supplements chapter of the book and I've gone back but everybody's saying we're not allowed to do it. Why were you allowed to do it? And I was like, go back and read the we do not recommend chapter. So we do not recommend and not allowed are two very different things. So we have to consider and be a little bit kind to the doctors to say that, let's just use the example of reishi. Reishi is a really good adaptogenic mushroom that has been suggested through studies that it's really good for leukemic cells. If you are on a particular chemotherapy drug and that single drug has not been tested with that adaptogenic mushroom, with that dose, they cannot say that that is safe. And I understand that, because if someone would have said to me, yeah, you can do that, you can do that, you can do that. I wasn't looking for that when I was going into my conversations. I knew I was carrying a level of risk. I absolutely would be suing somebody if that was the thing that took my child's life.
Yeah.
It is about risk balance. If people are expecting to go into their oncologist, even at the point of palliative care, so end of life, because I've got somebody that I work with who's palliative care, although they're doing really, really well, they won't ever recommend it. In the UK, our NHS policies, which is our National Health Service, which is our free healthcare, blocks it. It's a complete and utter policy. We do not recommend. So I've seen emails come backwards and forwards where pharmacists will say, unlikely that it's going to do harm, likely safe, but still, we do not recommend. And I think that's where you have to come a little bit into your own and say, if I as an individual want to take control over to whatever level I can of my medical condition, I have to accept that some of this is on me. If I'm looking for somebody to hold my hand, give me a cuddle and say, it's fine, what you're doing is absolutely right, and, to be your champion who is wearing a white coat, that is not going to happen. It is not going to happen because they can't.
Yeah. Well, their profession won't let them, their hospital won't let them, and they also really don't want to get sued. So I can understand that, but just recognize when you go in there, when they're saying the things, don't just think it's a yes or no. There's a lot of gray area in here to have a discussion, for you to do your research. And I think that's one of the core things. You did the research. You'd sit up every night on your phone. Not great for sleep, but you but you
Or
did.
cortisol.
But you were learning things along the way, and as a result, you were able to assist and aid in the care of your child, which, one, like I said, is empowering. But beyond that, is it just gave you information so you could understand the conversations that you were having. Because when we start talking about this science of cancer, it's not a shallow subject. There's a lot there. You said you did something along the way, and I think this is really important as well. And I'll beckon to U.S. President Ronald Reagan, who said, "Trust but verify." So you didn't take anything that they said as the gospel truth. You did your own research. You asked questions. You got second opinions, everything, so that you could be as sure as possible that you understood what they were saying, how it was going to work, why they needed it, and what the potential outcomes could be.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite quotes, and I say it often, is following science blindly is not science, it's religion. It's not. We were asked to sign paperwork that said nothing to do with the cancer, that my son had a bone marrow transplant that's passed a cure. Well, hopefully, touch wood, cure. You can't say cure completely, but you know what I mean. We're at 90. We were at a 13% prognosis. We're now 97%
That was the
probability
one
of cure.
question that you're probably glad you didn't ask at the beginning. You said, "If I had known."
No,
that,
my husband kept that from me, and I'm really, really glad that he took that burden, because it was a difficult one. But again, it's coming out of like, I just wanted to be able to look at his twin in the face if we came out of this situation and Teddy didn't make it, and go, I did everything. I asked all the questions. My husband sat in a meeting with really senior oncologists and says, your data doesn't stack. You want me to sign paperwork that says that this procedure, there's a 10% chance we could lose him just from the procedure, and your data doesn't stack? Your data doesn't make sense? It's that old argument, Alan, of like, if you can't explain it to somebody like they're a 12-year-old, you either haven't fully understood it or you're throwing jargon at them. And that was definitely our attitude throughout the process. There were situations by which when Teddy had his stem cell transplant, he spiked a fever. And I said to his mother, his blood count's recovering. And the senior doctor said, no, it's not. It's far too early. It's like, I know my child. Every time he spikes a fever, it's because his blood count's recovering. They wanted to ship him off to another part of the hospital, even though he was as immunocompromised as anybody gets. Like, he was in a padded room for 6 weeks, like with nobody being allowed in and out. And I said, sorry, you're telling us that we can't see family and friends. You're telling us everyone has to wear like masks and, various protocols to kind of like with your hygiene and stuff. But you want to take my immune compromised child across the hospital to do a scan with public individuals because you think he might need this type of a scan to identify what the fever is. I was like, you're not doing it. We'll see how he gets on for the next few days. And obviously, if he deteriorates, we'll address it. And that's what I'm trying to do with the book, is very much empower people that this is your journey. This is your fight. And this is yours. And you do it with your village of family, friends, doctors, and oncologists. But this is your journey. And you don't have to be a passenger in that journey. You're telling people where the direction of travel should go. But yes, research, inform, diligence, PubMed, NIH, not blogs. Like, make sure that you speak to as many people as you possibly can who have a level of authority, but then make an informed decision based upon your own gut instinct from what you've heard.
So, Sarah, I define wellness as being the healthiest, fittest, and happiest you can be. What are 3 strategies or tactics to get and stay well?
Okay, so my first one, and this comes from my background as a project manager. My first strategy is like, prepare to plan to fail. I've now completely said that wrong, but you understand. Failure to plan is planning to fail.
Yes.
So when I feel at my happiest, both mentally and physically, is when I carve out time in my week and I protect it to sit down and do my planning. So I'm really big on diversity in the diet, and I give out with my book free trackers so that people can actually do their own audit in an easy way that sits on the fridge, right? You just check off, Alan, like today I had oats and nuts and all those kind of things. I take that tracker and I sit down, and I usually do a Friday because it's a bit of an easier day with work and you're not in the weekends, you've not got the kids running around. And I take that hour and I just go, right, what are my intentions for the week ahead for my family with the meals? What have we got going on? Where do I need to be able to grab and go? Because we've all got a busy life, right? All got all these different things going on. But when I do that, and then I take that and actually do my grocery shopping off the back of that, and when I stick to that plan, everything feels like it goes easier. There isn't the mental health burden of getting really stressed because there isn't the right things in the cupboards. There's not the level of mum guilt at the end of the week that I didn't feel like I fed my children enough fruits and vegetables. And then physically, more energized. So that's kind of my first one. 2, I think the most underrated healing tool that we have that is free is sleep. And I'm also the worst at it. And I understand, those of us I'm nearly approaching 40, youngish children, sometimes you have that rebellion when they go to bed of I just watch my shows, I'll just doom scroll. And then you get into bed and you do a bit more doom scrolling and you're looking at the clock. But those differences, if you go to bed that much earlier, I get some people are morning risers and, early morning routines. But for me, actually going to bed that much earlier, there are so much in terms of studies and evidence about cortisol in the body and cell regeneration. You can do so much more if you just actually almost do a sleep diet of just for a few weeks, resetting yourself with your sleep. And I actually think the third one is our mobile phones. I think in terms of, I agree with all the principles you said, being, your health is your wealth. I think our mobile phones are draining so much from us and our time and our attention. And actually, mental health has a huge impact on your physical health because we've got the gut-brain axis and they do work together. I can see, for example, with my Teddy's twin, George, the mental health impact that actually ended up resulting in digestive issues for him because of the burden and the anxiety that he was carrying. So I like to get, you can buy online these phone lock boxes that you put your phone in and you put a timer on it. Yeah. And then you have to you could break it, right? But I'm not going to do that. But actually having time away from your device to just sit and get comfortable with being a little bit bored, I think that's so good for our health.
Yeah, being bored is actually not a bad thing. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. If someone wanted to learn more about you, learn more about your book, Cancer Isn't All About Chemo, where would you like for me to send them?
So you can either find us, my website, cancerisn'tallaboutchemo.com, which has got all the links. The book is available globally via Amazon. You can also reach out to me on social media. You can find us under Teddy's Tonic, so TEDDYS_tonic, especially if you're in the oncology community and you're just looking for a bit of additional support. And I do try and do quite inspirational things in terms of easy recipes and life hacks that can just, whether or not you're going through an oncology journey or you've just got health anxiety about being that 1 in 2 to get cancer, I'm here to help you.
Awesome. Sarah, thank you so much for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here.
If you enjoyed today's show, take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you would, please leave a rating and review on your podcast player of choice. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we bring back Dr. Stephen Gundry and discuss his book, The Gut-Brain Paradox: Improve Your Mood, Clear Brain Fog, and Reverse Disease by Healing Your Microbiome. Until then, have a happy and healthy week.